Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 247. I'm the co-host Kyle Anzalone. Today, joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
I'm great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing well. Great to have you back on, Connor. And want to got a lot to talk about today, Russia and Iran stuff. But just want to remind people how they could support the show. If you'd just like to share the show, the best place to find it is at antiwar.com or on the blog at the Libertarian Institute. You can also find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey, on the Libertarian Institute All podcast feed, and at our social media accounts, Facebook and Twitter. The Twitter handle is at con_interest. You could donate to the show at Patreon or Subscribe to Star. We also take crypto, and that information is in the show notes page. Another way you could help the show, and this way you get some great CBD products for yourself, is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code PEACE. That will save you 20% when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. Connor, what do you like at Paloma Verde?
I strongly recommend the soft gels, with also the ones with curcumin will really help you if you've got some extra inflammation going on. But that'll knock it out. I mean, I find I think they're about 25 milligrams a pop, and they're pretty effective when you take even just one. The gummy bears are delicious and they act real fast, and the tinctures are probably the best bang for your buck because that's about the strongest stuff they have. They have some really good flavors on that. I really like the mint one, and it's about the highest quantity as well.
All right, palomaverdecbd.com, promo code PEACE. Connor, let's get into the show and start off talking about Ukraine and the war going on there. On the ground, it doesn't appear there's been many real changes since the last time that I updated this on the show. Russian forces are still around, not the entire city, but at least, like, again, if you draw a circle around Kiev, probably like 8 to maybe 3-4 o'clock is controlled by Russia, where there still are some areas to the south of the city that seem to be completely controlled by Ukraine. Not that that necessarily means it's easy for people to escape the fighting in this city, but that is the it's not surrounded as often described. If you look at the fighting going on in Kiev, it seems to remain around the outskirts, and Russia really hasn't pushed all the forces that they were talking about building up around the city into the city so far. There's fighting going on in the eastern cities. There's also a lot of protests to the Russian occupation, not just violent, but also non-violent protests, and that seems to be particularly going on in some of these eastern cities, and then like along the coastal areas in Mariupol and Odessa. There were another 20,000 people who got out of Mariupol this week, so good news there that at least to some extent those civilian convoys are running. I've read that over 100,000 people have so far been able to flee the city, and there are about 2 million to 3 million total refugees at this point, with almost all of those going to the NATO aligned states. And then some have fled into the area of Moldova that's controlled by Russia, or Belarus, or Russia itself. Now, there are also the people who are fleeing the Donbass and who I don't believe are being counted in that number. I'm just not sure how many people are seeking to escape the Donbass and moving into Russia from there. We have the city of Lviv, where there are still troops near the Polish border after there was a strike on a military facility that is about 20 miles from the border and 10 miles north of the city. That strike, according to Russia, targeted foreign fighters and weapons. It does seem that that is the case, that was the target of the strikes. The big dispute is the number of people killed, with Russia putting that at about 35, and Russia putting that at 180, and the Ukrainians putting that at 35. And I guess, yeah, this would probably be a good time to talk about those foreign fighters, because there was a video posted yesterday that made some pretty good and widespread rounds, at least on Twitter, of this man who I believe is a 28-year-old American. His name is Mike Dunn, or at least Dunn was his last name on the video. If he's using an alias, I don't know. Ford Fisher said that he had recorded this guy speaking in the United States before. And so that seemed to me good enough that, this probably is an American who went to Ukraine, to join up the fight. And he described a situation where they weren't giving enough weapons or equipment, no body armor, no ammunition really, hardly any weapons, and were expected to go to the front, seemingly to be used as cannon fodder. And then, when people decided to leave, they were not allowed to. They were redirected to the front lines and basically had to smuggle themselves out of the country. This particularly for any men, where there is a general conscription for Ukrainian citizens. I don't think that's actually supposed to apply to Americans, but once you put yourself in a country that's essentially under martial law, I guess you're dealing with the situations that exist there. So that is and then the AP reported today that there were shortages of weapons for foreign fighters, so that did seem to give some validity to what that guy was saying, that there, at least the weapon shortage part is there. And I imagine the rest is true as well. There was a video posted by somebody who claimed to be fighting with the Ukrainian government, who said that guy was lying, particularly about cutting up passports. Now, the reason I brought this up now is that he mentioned that the death count was far higher than they were putting out. And so that, again, maybe is giving some validity to the number being suggested at Russia as being a lot higher, maybe as high as 180. The UN has updated the civilian death count to about 700, 691 now, with I think 80 children total. So this is, just absolutely tragic that many people are dying. If you look at the destruction in Ukraine, you would assume that those numbers are higher. There was a report that a pregnant woman who was at the maternity center in Mariupol was among the dead, as well as her newborn child. Now, I did have somebody dispute and say, Kyle, you're wrong, that wasn't a hospital and hadn't been for a while. Everything I'm, looked into on the maternity hospital that was hit in Mariupol, it does seem to me that there were pregnant women or young children in that building. Now, I can't say exactly what they were there for. At one point in time, it was used as a maternity ward, so it made sense that was still the case. And that does not mean that there wasn't Azov or some other military force using another different portion of that building for something else. Not that justifies the strike, but just, to understand, this is what happens in war, right? This is what's happening in war all over the world, that militants will take up sniper positions in apartment buildings and in hospitals or whatever, or use hospitals put underneath, store weapons and do command centers. And so then people carry out strikes on hospitals. It's disgusting, but this is warfare. And so this is why it was terrible when Putin invaded Ukraine. And I assume things like this were going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised that this was the case. At the same time, there has been a lot of false stories to come out of this war. And so if it turns out not to be true, I'll certainly update that on the show. But I do believe one of those women are now among the 600 plus dead Ukrainians from Putin's invasion. I guess the other thing worth mentioning is there have been people dying in the Donbass, and I'm not sure if those people are being counted or exactly what the nature of that is. But it is worth mentioning that, even if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine, there still would be war going on in the Donbass. And so while it's fair to count almost all these deaths as the fault of Vladimir Putin's invasion, there may be a couple that, legitimately would have happened anyway. Talks are going on. There was a report today from the Financial Times that there is a proposal that possibly could net something meaningful. This is from, again, the Financial Times. Some of the things in the proposal say it's a 15-point plan. There is neutrality for Ukraine. There is no foreign weapons or bases in Ukraine. Russian troops leave, so no occupation. Ukraine retains an army. And then there is still issues remaining on the territory, recognizing both Crimea and the Donbass as Ukrainian and no longer Russian territory. So I think that's most of what I have on the tots. Zelensky did say, and Dave DeCamp wrote this up at antiwar.com, that there was room for compromise. Talks are difficult, but there's room for compromise. So, these kind of things kind of suggest that something could get done here. Honestly, if the Financial Times is somewhat correct about the proposal being offered here, it doesn't seem to me to be impossible that this is something that could end up as a workable deal and a lasting deal to end this conflict. However, it does say it's a 15-point plan, and we certainly don't know all those points. All right, so Connor, more calls from a note for no-fly zones. We had this from Estonia's prime minister, but more recently and more importantly, from Ukrainian President Zelensky, both in Canada and in the United States. He spoke in front of the legislators of both countries. It's important to remember when Zelensky is speaking in front of Congress, he has a very favorable audience. As Ben Friedman has reported, the Ukraine has invested a ton of money in lobbying in the United States, and so they have a lot of these people, including Ted Cruz, on their payroll. And boy, does it really help when you have people very sympathetic to the message in Congress. And then let's see. Yeah, so that was Zelensky. Zelensky's speech, I guess, I thought maybe it would be worth doing a big breakdown on it, Connor. I just don't see it. I don't think he made that many substantial points. He asked for a no-fly zone. He asked for weapons. He asked for more sanctions. He tried to invoke, America's emotions at the deepest levels. Pearl Harbor, 9/11, as you pointed out before the show. Apparently, he said, "I have a dream," invoking Martin Luther King. So I'm not. That might have been bad PR. That guy. There can't be an expectation that every Ukrainian understands the significance of Martin Luther King. And so I'm guessing he wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but it should be taken that way.
I bet the audience liked it, though.
Oh, and then before the speech, apparently Nancy Pelosi led a chant of "Glory to Ukraine," and also Zelensky wore a shirt with a cross on it. And so both of these are potentially Nazi symbols, but I do want to do some more research into it. I see some people already, floating and running with this idea. I did want to bring it up on the show and say I do want to do more research into that "Glory to Ukraine" quote.
Glory to the heroes thing, yeah.
Because, in one sense, Connor, maybe it is just something that Bandera made up, and that's what they chanted when they were slaughtering the tens of thousands of Poles that they killed during the Ukrainian Holocaust. Or it could have been something that always existed and they just kind of adopted it for a brief period of time or something like that. There's a lot of ways that could go. Same with the Iron Cross, where it is the Nazis did use it, but I think the French still have a cross military medal as well. So that, that doesn't necessarily mean that Zelensky was openly wearing Nazi or Pelosi was leading a Nazi chant or anything like that.
And that slogan apparently goes along with a specific salute that they do. So yeah, if you're just saying it, because it's, saying "Glory to Ukraine" is kind of a generic statement anyway. So there's plausible deniability that that's not the case. But apparently, yeah, if they combine it, there is a Nazi salute that goes along with that phrase, "Glory to Ukraine," glory to the heroes, I believe. And I've just seen that Fred Kagan has been saying that phrase, and Newland as well. I think they do it in Ukrainian as well, which is, I don't know, weird. I don't know if I guess I'm assuming Pelosi didn't do that today, but yeah, a lot of people are saying that. But I agree with you that it's deniable anyway.
Yeah. We also had in the past couple of days Jake Sullivan meet with the Chinese foreign minister in Rome. That meeting, prior to that meeting, the U.S. was making some threats towards China, or at least making those threats public. The high-level talks, I don't think, really netted anything between the U.S. and China, but the U.S. communicated that it was unhappy with China's apparent plan to support Russia's military efforts and their efforts to evade the U.S. economic warfare. It, of course, makes a lot more sense if, Russia and China increased trade in a response to the fact that Russia was cut off from trade from so many other countries. But I would be opposed to any country selling to another country if that country is currently at a war. Although, if the U.S. is really concerned about this, maybe we should cut off arms sales to Israel and Saudi Arabia first. That is one of the problems I have with Jake Sullivan's meeting here. It's not necessarily that anytime some average American is like, oh, the war in Ukraine, that I think everybody should say, Yemen, 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 Yemen. But if Jake Sullivan is trying to lecture the Chinese about the war, they're supporting Russia for the war in Ukraine, it's just hypocritical. And in that case, I do think you should be like, no, you are an American official. Your job should be able to end the American wars and the American starvation campaigns against Iran, Venezuela, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Iraq, and North Korea. Like, those should be the priorities for the American officials, right? And so just want to make that point. I hate that Jake Sullivan is out there running around doing this kind of thing and judging other countries for supporting Russia when the U.S. is supporting far worse crimes. So I think more talks are expected today and later in the week. At this point, I think Russia and Ukraine are basically having ongoing talks. The latest talks were paused so both sides could go back home and talk about definitions, which is pretty important if they're getting down to that level, that they've agreed on the general point. And, now they're talking about what it means for Ukraine to import foreign weapons or something like that, or to recognize the independence of the Donbass region. And we have Biden tweeting out that they're going to send a bunch more weapons. Oh, he actually had a couple tweets. This one I want to bring up that said, we will make sure Ukraine has weapons to defend against the invading Russian force. And then today he announced those weapons, an $800 million weapons package. And it includes 800 anti-aircraft weapons, 9,000 anti-armor systems, 7,000 small arms, 20,000 rounds of ammunition, and drones. I believe the drones are like the suicide type drones, right? Where, these are bat pads, they explode. It's not like he's giving Ukraine Reapers or anything crazy like that. Although that is, still a significant weapon to be transferring to the Ukrainians. In some way, this could be to make up for the fact that apparently the, foreign fighters don't have any weapons. But you would imagine at some point Russia is going to try to stop these weapon shipments, and that is going to be a key potential place for escalation in all of this.
Yeah, the numbers are racking up very fast. They said before all this got started, he said in his State of the Union, we provided $1 billion in security assistance in the last year, and now in that omnibus there was as a part of that almost $14 billion aid package to Ukraine. I think $3.5 billion there is allocated for weapons for Ukraine. And now today he announced package is $800 million.
Yeah. So $1 billion in the past week. And of course, Congress is working on the omnibus, as you say. Now let's, I think that's about all I have on the Ukraine situation today, Connor. Of course, as always, that this is a tragedy, what's happening in Ukraine. Putin is waging an aggressive war in that country and killing a lot of people. And, maybe one of the few bright spots is there is a potential deal now on the table. And then Iran talks are linked with Russia, as Russia is a key player in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And me and Will Porter wrote this up at the Libertarian Institute yesterday. Russia says U.S. gave written guarantees on Iran nuclear cooperation. Russia says it has received written guarantees that U.S. sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine will not impact its nuclear cooperation with Iran, as diplomats on all sides of the negotiations to receive the 2015 nuclear deal say the talks are nearly complete. Escalating tensions between Moscow and Washington, however, are presenting new challenges. And so, about a week ago, maybe a little bit more, Russia had, seemingly thrown a problem into the warts of the Iran talks by saying that, any U.S. sanctions on Iran can't impact the Iran nuclear deal. Russia now says they've received written assurances that, it won't impact the Iran nuclear program, which seems to be short of the original Russian demands. But at the same time, it maybe is good enough to move past this hurdle. Now, I want to make clear, it seems that this is just another hurdle, and that the major and final one, as pointed out by Iran, is still the United States. And so this isn't what's kept the Iran deal from getting done in the past week. It's just been an additional hurdle that Russia added into the process. And yeah, I think that's why I have on that. If it's true, if they got the written assurances, that is probably what, Russia needs to get this done. It's kind of important because Russia does work on Iran's nuclear reactors, and that work probably can't end overnight. And it has continued through the U.S. maximum sanctions campaign, pressure campaign on Iran. And so, it's not surprising that the U.S. would continue to allow this to happen. But Connor, what else do we have on Iran stuff?
Yeah, so I'll just add that so Hossein Amir Abdollahian, the Iranian foreign minister, was just in Moscow with Lavrov when they announced this. And Lavrov is now saying that the deal is expected to be finished soon, that they're almost done, basically, that they're in the home stretch. But he said, his quote was, "We have received written guarantees. They are included in the text of the agreement itself on the resumption of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian nuclear program." And Amir Abdollahian and Lavrov rejected the claims from the Americans that Russia was an obstacle to progress in Vienna. The Iranian foreign minister also said that there will be no connection between developments in Ukraine and the Vienna talks. He added, "If we reach an agreement with the U.S. on remaining issues which relate to some of Iran's main red lines, based on my talks with Mr. Lavrov today, Russia will remain beside the Islamic Republic of Iran until reaching a good and sustainable agreement, continuing to play the constructive role it has played since the start." Because there were sort of conflicting messages we covered last week. I suspected that although obviously, like you said, it was another hurdle, I don't think it was insurmountable. And I think that the West was trying to play up, or particularly the Americans are trying to play up the idea. Actually, the Europeans actually too. Yeah. We're trying to play up this idea that the Iranians are really, really mad with the Russians right now, and they're just not showing it. And there was some speculation as to what are they trying to do? Are they trying to scuttle the deal, or, use all this as leverage? What was really going on? But it seems to be that they have resolved that. Let's see. So, but again, Amir Abdollahian is saying that it's the Americans and their excessive demands that need to be dropped so that an agreement can be reached soon. They also discussed regional affairs, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. Lavrov praised Iran for their objective stance in, is dealing with the war in Ukraine, and for rejecting the sanctions that have been the sanctions blitz led by the U.S. Again, the Amir Abdollahian apparently brought a message from Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister, which urged an end to the fighting, and the Iranians reiterated that they blame NATO expansion for the whole crisis, and that they oppose the war and have repeated their calls for a political solution. And it sounds like Lavrov will be visiting Tehran here soon, and he also said or praised the fact that their bilateral trade has exceeded $4 billion for the first time. And they said that there's going to be a new cooperation agreement that Tehran proposed recently that'll be signed soon. So beyond that, as far as the Iran talks, they're currently on hold, the talks in Vienna. And from what I understand at this point, there's still a debate over essentially the idea. I mean, the U.S. has apparently refused to lift the foreign terrorist designation on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The way this Middle East Eye report discusses it, it sounds like what I talked about last week about the deal between the IAEA and Tehran, which I thought it seemed like that issue had been resolved. But again, it's months out, so they have to present evidence, deal and a report to the IAEA, to Rafael Grossi, the Director General, about those undeclared sites and the uranium, the small amounts of uranium, processed uranium particles that are there, that date back apparently like 2 decades ago, and explain all that. And then he presents it to the Board of Governors. But that's not taking place until June. So in the meantime, it still is kind of hanging there as kind of an unresolved issue. And apparently there's still companies, businesses, and individuals that Iran wants to see sanctions lifted on. However, there is some news that they've got a much better deal going now than they did previously. That it sounds like Ali Bagheri Khani has negotiated a much stronger deal than Zarif was able to. So basically, they have the deal is okay. So Mikhail Ulyanov put out was quoted as saying that Iran got much more than it could expect, much more. So Middle East Eye spoke to some sources who, an Iranian source who says that basically it says these include the right to disconnect but not dismantle the cascades of advanced centrifuges at 3 sites in Iran, which Tehran regarded as a implicit guarantee should the U.S. renege on the deal, as Donald Trump did in 2018. So the quote is, in my opinion, even if the U.S. Congress were to miraculously approve the deal, they could still reverse it within hours if they wanted to do so. Therefore, in case the U.S. decides to violate or tear up the deal again, the existence of these highly advanced centrifuges are stronger guarantees than anything the U.S. could possibly give. And then they say here that Iran is estimated to have more than 3,300 of these advanced centrifuges, which are 10 times more effective than the first generation of machines. So it's just very interesting that they I think that's very smart, because it's obvious that, I mean, Mike Pence was just in Israel and told an Israeli newspaper that, you know, the next Republican administration that he predicted would win and come into office in 2025 will rip up the Iran deal. And we have 49 of the Republican senators coming out and saying that they oppose the deal unless, you know, these are totally non-starters, unless it limits Iran's missile capabilities and deals with their support for, quote, terrorists, or, what they call their proxies in the region. It's just their independent foreign policy and alliances in the region. But Rand Paul, actually, who was initially was not good on this issue when it first came around, and actually signed that Tom Cotton letter that they sent to Iran saying that we'll rip this up as soon as we get a Republican in office. He's broken with the Republicans here, and he's saying that, look, you don't even know what the deal says yet. It's unfinished. This is tantamount to opposing diplomacy outright. And he says, let's see, what's the quote? He says it's not a very thoughtful position. So, and one of the interesting things that Trita Parsi talks about in this article at Responsible Statecraft about all of this is that, as Pence is coming out and saying this stuff and the Republicans are in opposition, and you have, Ted Cruz vowing to subvert the whole thing. As Trita said, even if they return to the deal, because it's such a uncertain situation, that it acts as like a de facto sanction, because just them saying all this stuff, even if Biden returns to the deal, and let's say Biden stays in the deal for the rest of his administration, it's still a significant deterrent to international businesses entering the Iranian market. And so they may still not see, the benefits that they expect from the deal, which could cause a real problem, because, as he says in his article here, that either the U.S. will walk out if the GOP wins here in 2024, they'll either walk out of the deal like Trump did, or take an ambiguous position where they don't commit to staying and they flirt with leaving. And he says Tehran will likely then quit the deal or reduce their obligations like they did from 2019 onward. But he suspects that the deal wouldn't be able to survive that again, and it would just collapse. Now, we also have even some House Democrats coming out and opposing the deal. There's a report here from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. They put out an open letter with some Republicans signing onto it as well. And they're complaining that certain Iranian officials are getting removed from the sanctions list, that, that the IRGC might be removed from the terrorist list, and that, they don't want to see Russia benefit from Iran's sanctions relief. So then, let's see. I want to make sure I get to beyond that, because there's some other things about the deal. So before we move into what happened in Iraqi Kurdistan over the weekend, the other details about what's on paper at this point is that, which, see, there's a quote from Joseph Borrell, the EU representative, the foreign policy chief of the EU, says, quote, "A final text is essentially ready and on the table." So according to this report from Middle East Eye, they're saying that under the deal being finalized in Vienna, most of the sanctions the U.S. imposed when Trump pulled Washington out of the deal in 2018 will have been lifted. So nearly all the people and companies that were sanctioned under the maximum pressure campaign will be freed from those sanctions. And as far as the verification mechanism we've been hearing so much about and talking about for months, they say that it has been created, and basically each side will be given set dates by which time each side would have to fulfill their obligations. There's also a peace package apart from the talks in Vienna, where Iran will see the return of frozen funds in South Korea, Japan, and Iraq, as well as that mutual prisoner exchange going on between the Americans and the Iranians. An Iranian delegate to the talks said to Middle East Eye that 99% is already agreed. That remaining 1% is of high quality. So now we can move on. So basically, before I get to what's been going on with Israel, it should be noted that another problem here with the, one of the reasons why the talks was put on hold was that the U.S. Is stealing Iranian oil. Again, it appears to be the case. So there are two ships controlled by the Greeks, one in the Bahamas, one in Houston, that were seized by the U.S., and their cargo is being unloaded at this point. And the Iranians apparently repeatedly demanded that the U.S. refrain from doing this in Vienna. And the cargo itself is worth about some reports say it's worth $38 million, and other reports say it's even more than that. And as Jason Ditz says here at antiwar.com, it's basically the U.S. has been after oil on the MT Stark 1 and the Panamanian flagged Arena. They claim that its oil illegally comes from Iran. The Stark 1 is a sanctioned ship, and they claim that they secretly transferred oil to the Arena. The Arena's document says that it came from Oman, but the U.S. is saying they reject that. They also accuse Stark 1 of having its deck repainted to, disguise itself and make the U.S. think it was a different ship. And they say the transfer dates back to 2020. The U.S. says the oil was transferred to a third ship, the MT Nostos, and the U.S. ordered that ship to take the oil to Houston to be unloaded. And it appears, like I said, the U.S. is just going to seize it, which, they've done this before. But again, on the eve of a deal being signed, it's very provocative. Again, I don't think it's insurmountable, but at the same time, last week when Israel, the reports came out about Israel bombing Damascus, I assumed, since they do that, or they bomb Syria, often Damascus every week, almost, that it wouldn't necessarily be as big of a deal. But it turned out that it was, because now the IRGC has claimed responsibility for these ballistic missile attacks in Erbil, which were originally said to be targeting the U.S. consulate, although it's interesting the way that the U.S. is kind of handling this. The State Department has come out and said that that's not what happened, that they were not targeting the U.S. consulate, that no contractors, no U.S. forces, no U.S. citizens were harmed. And even though I'll get to more of the details, but I'll just point out that even though, Sullivan is being asked, how is this going to affect the JCPOA? He's saying basically that Biden is committed to, the way he phrases it is kind of more PR. Let's be honest, but he says, Biden remains committed to stopping Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. He goes, the various negotiators are back home in their capitals, and we will have to see what happens in the days ahead with respect to the diplomacy around the nuclear deal. One thing I will say is that the only thing more dangerous than Iran armed with ballistic missiles and advanced military capabilities is an Iran that has all those things and a nuclear weapon. So So basically, the Iranians claimed that they were targeting a Mossad site, an Israeli strategic center. I've seen it reported that they said that it was like a center for conspiracy and mischief. Now, there were no casualties in this attack, although it seems like most of the damage was done to a two-story villa on a farm. The several houses were damaged, and a TV station called Kurdistan 24 was damaged as well. Now, the RGC again said that this is a response. There's basically three things the Iranians are responding to, three separate Israeli attacks. So they bombed, they killed two IRGC men in a recent strike near Damascus. But there was also an attack on a drone factory in Tabriz, in very northwestern part of Iran. And so apparently some people died in these attacks as well. So it sounds like the Israelis have carried out a couple of different drone attacks in Iran itself, attacking drone factories. So let's see. So a senior Iranian official told Middle East Eye that the strike was a response to a previous Israeli attack launched from Iraqi Kurdistan on a drone factory in the northwestern Iranian city of Tabriz a few weeks ago. It says one of the most important tactical air bases is in Tabriz. It includes an Army aviation headquarters, F-5 squadrons, and a radar station. Two major explosions in the city were reported by Iranian media in recent weeks. The first took place on February 4th in a three-story building in eastern Tabriz's Yusufabad Abbasi district. Local authorities said at the time that the cause of the explosion was not clear, but at least 3 people were killed and 5 buildings were damaged. The second explosion took place on the 8th of March, affecting several buildings in the Ahmedabad area, injuring 4 people. And again, local authorities said it wasn't clear what caused the explosion. They speculated that it was a gas leak at first, but the photograph showed such widespread damage that that's since been ruled out as an explanation. As far as the actual attack on this this site in Erbil, the Iranians are saying that they killed 2 Israeli officers in the strike, but so far the Israelis, if you read Times of Israel, if you read Middle East Eye, if you read any of these different outlets, they say that the Israelis, and Jason has pointed out at antiwar.com as well, the Israelis are not discussing this. They're not responding to they're not commenting or responding to inquiries from media about what happened. Now, there was also, if you read because I'm going to get to this, there was another attack that apparently was much more substantial that destroyed about hundreds apparently of Iranian drones in I believe it's in Kermanshah, which is south of Tabriz but still in western Iran. They apparently destroyed hundreds of drones in that area. But let's see. So the Israelis are not commenting on that. But I was going to say is there was a report on Sunday night that Times of Israel talks about in their report from a Lebanese, I don't know if it's a television channel, a Lebanese outlet that's apparently connected to Hezbollah. It's a television station who said that the Iranians killed 7, I believe. No, they injured 7 Israelis of these officers and killed 4 of them. And that 4 of those injured are in critical condition. Now, let's see. So the Times of Israel report says that in the middle of February, this unmanned aerial vehicle attack caused major damage to Iran's drone fleet, and that this is what Iran was primarily responding to. Against a site in Iraq that they claim was an Israeli intelligence base. They said hundreds of drones are assessed to have been destroyed in the attack on an air base near Kermanshah in western Iran, Haaretz reported yesterday. An airstrike, they talk about basically, the Israel's record of bombing Syria and claiming that, when they kill Shiite militiamen or Syrian Arab Army people that they claim that they're targeting Iran or weapon shipments usually going to Hezbollah. And they talk about all this, but they've carried out covert actions in Iran, of course. But they did make the point that like an actual drone attack, which apparently that's what happened here in Tabriz, Krementia as well. This is actually pretty unusual. And again, we've been talking about, quite a bit on the show lately that the Israelis, as we get closer and closer to a deal, continue to threaten that not only have they been preparing for, a major attack on Iran, that they absolutely will continue to, hobble their economy and attack them with, actual kinetic action, and military action, and in other ways as well. And that regardless of if, the deal is the U.S. returns to the JCPOA or not, the Israelis will not, they will maintain their, as they call freedom of action and all this stuff. So, so basically the Iranians are saying that site was, that was basically Israeli intelligence that was being run out of there, and that that was where these attacks came from. And Israel is hyping up the threat of Iranian drones. They're saying is Iran's UAV terror, defense officials said, is like a global threat, and that they're exporting this technology to all their allies in, proxies in Yemen, so the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas and the militias in Syria and Iraq. They said, I saw that Netanyahu apparently even seized on this to say that you can't return to the JCPOA now, it's too dangerous. But yeah, initially people thought that this was a way of them trying to subvert a return to the JCPOA, but now they're pointing out mostly that the drones should be covered in the JCPOA. Iran's big drone arsenal, supposedly that's a global threat. Now they'll just say at last thing that a series of incidents over the past few months are showing that there's been an escalation in sort of the Cold War between Israel and Iran. There was a cyber attack on Monday that took down Israeli government websites for over an hour Monday evening. Some media reports quickly said that Iran must be responsible. And Iranian state television reported, it's a little bit opaque, but they claim that the Revolutionary Guard has arrested members of a network who were attempting to sabotage the Fordo uranium enrichment facility. That's essentially it. The only other thing I'll just point out is that as far as the stuff in Erbil, that there is some claims that this was more to do with Iraqi politics, that they were targeting specifically the house that received the most damage. The villa on that farm was owned by a sheikh who is the CEO of a company an energy company based in Erbil called KAR, K-A-R. And they have offices in Turkey, Jordan, the UAE, and the United States. And I guess the company itself is owned by Masoud Barzani, who is the father of the current prime minister of the Iraqi Kurdistan, based in Erbil, and the government based in Erbil, and that the president is he's the uncle of the president as well, and that there's sort of speculation that Iran is concerned that Sadr is working with the KDP to kind of sideline the Iranian-backed factions in Iraq. But if you read these reports in Middle East Eye, there's also discussion of how this is actually more about an internal dispute between the IRGC and Iranian intelligence, who apparently they've been allowing Iranian intelligence to kind of take more control of foreign policy in recent months. But they felt that at this point, with just the successive Israeli attacks and even probably the seizure of the Iranian oil, that it was time for them to grab the wheel and establish some significant deterrence here. And also, there's some people who are saying that it doesn't make much sense that and I tend to agree that the Iranians would launch this kind of a ballistic missile attack. They haven't done this in Iraq since the assassination of Soleimani, when they retaliated for that against U.S. bases, that they would do that over, just an internal Iraqi politics thing here with Sadr and the Kurds. But and also, they've discouraged the more militia aligned parties in Iraq from causing too much trouble after they fared so poorly in the elections. So I think it's most likely to do more with Israel, although I will say this, there hasn't been much in the way of evidence presented that the Israelis were working out of that site. And I believe Mustafa al-Kadhimi, the prime minister in Baghdad, has demanded that the Iranians present evidence. that is essentially it. It appears though that we're getting much closer to a deal, um, and I don't. It doesn't seem from the U.S. responses here that they're going to let this strike and air bolt really affect the negotiations or the JC or the return to the JCPOA. And it does kind of make sense, I would say, that Israel clearly has been trying to do something to provoke a reaction from the Iranians or to sabotage the return here, which we knew that they would do. The Iranians, last thing I'll point out, they've told the Iraqis that they will not tolerate any other attacks from Iraqi soil, that they've warned them before for this. And let's see, I mean, again, the Israelis have not commented, but as Jason points out here in this report, that it's most likely one of the reasons why. I mean, they usually don't comment on their attacks on Syria, but one of the reasons why they're probably not saying anything now at this point, even if they did, let's say, lose take some casualties in this strike, that the speculation as to the other motives is just going to fuel more anti-Iran sentiment, which could help them if they are trying to get if they are trying to subvert the deal. But it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case at this point.
All right. Connor, thanks for the update on that, and hopefully we get back to the deal, but it seems like there's still a couple issues at stake here. Anyways, people share the show if you can. It's at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com. Follow Connor on Twitter. Connor, what's your Twitter handle?
At Freeman's Mind 96.
All right. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _. The show is at Con_interest. You can also follow on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, Twitter, our YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, donate at Patreon, Subscribestar, and crypto. Buy your CBD at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right. We'll be back with more shows later in the week.
Get